In the opening scene, the film depicts the events of the war between China and Japan, in which the Imperial Japanese Army has invaded Shanghai. A team of Chinese soldiers is sent to defend their homeland, embarking on a long journey toward the battlefield. Upon reaching the city of Dachang, they find the place completely destroyed, with no traces of their fallen comrades. During an exploration of the area, a scout named Duan Wu witnesses Japanese soldiers burning the bodies of Chinese soldiers in the distance. Unfortunately, he is spotted by the enemy, prompting them to give chase. While fleeing, the Japanese army stumbles upon the rest of the Chinese soldiers and quickly attacks them. Fortunately, Duan Wu manages to grab his younger brother, Xiao Hubei, and his uncle before hiding inside a collapsed building. As night falls, the surviving soldiers, as well as the deserters, quietly escape the war zone. They join a machine gun company that guides them to a hideout in Shanghai, the last stronghold against the Japanese army. At first, the commander Zhu Shengzhong refuses to work with the deserters and decides to eliminate them. However, Lieutenant Colonel Xie recognizes the need for a larger force in the war and assigns the deserters to fortify the area outside. In the midst of their tasks, Duan Wu approaches Colonel Xie and clarifies that they are not deserters, explaining that their squad was attacked. However, the colonel doesn't listen to him and sends him away. Later that night, while the deserters are working, they notice a group of refugees seeking shelter. They enter the international settlement, which is under British control. Duan Wu's uncle attempts to join the crowd secretly in hopes of finding safety there, but is turned away due to his military attire. Back at the hideout, the soldiers are captivated by the enchanting voice of a woman singing from a building across the river. This serves as a poignant reminder that even during desperate times, music always prevails. Meanwhile, the younger brother, Hubei, becomes friends with a boy named Chewi who is of similar age. In another part of the hideout, the deserters in the basement stumble upon a hidden passage leading to a stable housing a white horse. One of the deserters releases the horse, causing it to gallop uncontrollably within the hideout. Fortunately, Chewi manages to calm the horse by whistling. In the British concession area, the streets are filled with refugees seeking safety. A professor named Zhang surveys the city through binoculars and notices that the Japanese have occupied another building in Shanghai. He also observes the Japanese soldiers advancing towards the last remaining Shanghai hideout. A few moments later, they reach the place and discover that only a few deserters are present, leading them to believe that the Chinese soldiers have fled. However, this proves to be a trap, as the Chinese soldiers, who are hiding inside, swiftly launch a surprise attack. A fierce battle ensues, and several Japanese soldiers are killed on the spot, with some casualties on the Chinese side as well. Eventually, the enemies are overpowered and defeated due to the superior tactics of the Chinese. In the aftermath, Commander Zhu orders the deserters to scavenge and loot the bodies of the deceased Japanese soldiers. Shortly after, the deserters are ordered to eliminate the remaining Japanese survivors within the hideout. Old Abacus, one of the deserters, is armed with a gun and instructed to go first. He is initially hesitant but is forced by Commander Zhu at gunpoint. Duan Wu is next, hesitating at first but ultimately taking down the soldier driven by revenge for his uncle's death. Meanwhile, a Chinese journalist named Feng goes to the Japanese base and meets with Colonel Kano Isao, to whom he sells valuable information about the Chinese hideout. Upon receiving this information, Colonel Kano immediately initiates plans for a new attack. Later, the Japanese soldiers positioned outside the Chinese hideout attempt to get the attention of the Chinese soldiers within. They demand surrender, threatening to execute their captive team members if they don't comply. However, the Chinese soldiers instead open fire in their direction. In retaliation, the Japanese army hurls several gas bombs, forcing the Chinese soldiers to seek shelter. One generous soldier provides Duan Wu with a face mask, saving his life. Amidst the chaos, Duan Wu accidentally falls into an underground canal, where he discovers a secret escape route outside the hideout. The leakage of the harmful gas from the hideout engulfs the surrounding area, triggering panic among the people in the settlement. They frantically flee for their lives. Later that night, 3 Chinese students attempt to sneak from the British concession area to the other side to join the fight. They make their escape through the gate, but are apprehended by British soldiers. Meanwhile, some people from the international press capture footage of the Shanghai Hideout from a nearby building's second floor. At the hideout, Duan Wu makes an honest plea to his superiors, explaining that he and his brother are mere farmers and should be allowed to leave. Unfortunately, he is once again ignored. Determined to explore potential escape routes, Duan Wu then returns to the underground canal. During his exploration, he is spotted by Old Abacus and another deserter, who join him in his quest. As they move ahead, they surprisingly spot a group of Japanese soldiers stealthily entering the hideout through the same canal. Trapped with no immediate means of escape, the trio submerges themselves underwater. Unfortunately, one of them cannot hold his breath for long, and he passes away. Once the Japanese soldiers pass, Duanwu and Old Abacus cautiously emerge but are spotted by civilians who promptly make noise, alerting the British Army. Thinking quickly, Duanwu claims that they're not attempting to escape, but instead came out to alert everyone that Japanese soldiers have infiltrated the area. This causes chaos, prompting the Chinese soldiers to quickly awaken and defend themselves. They manage to successfully repel the Japanese soldiers and retain their hideout. Following these events, Duanwu and Old Abacus are reprimanded by Colonel Xie, who seems to suspect their true intentions. As a result, they are assigned a punishment and sent to reinforce the frontline defenses. Meanwhile, the 3 students who previously failed to enter the hideout make a second attempt and manage to gain entry this time. The next day, journalist Fang engages in conversation with high-ranking British officials, disclosing that Japan intends to seize the last remaining hideout in 3 hours. Fang gets paid in exchange for the news, and the officials ask how much he would like to bet on it, but Fang doesn't seem interested and walks away. After a few hours, the Japanese soldiers launch their attack on the hideout, prompting the Chinese soldiers to make a valiant stand in defense of their territory. Desperate to bolster their forces, the Chinese soldiers distribute weapons to the deserters and even the students, compelling them to join the fight against the Japanese troops. A fierce and deadly battle erupts between the two sides, resulting in the loss of numerous lives. In a strategic move, the Japanese soldiers use a crane to demolish a section of the building's wall. Responding to this, the Chinese soldiers adapt by employing gas tanks instead of conventional grenades. As the battle escalates, the 3 students, who were initially eager to participate in the war, become scared and desperately search for a place to hide. Tragically, one student dies when a grenade detonates nearby, while another is shot and injured. Meanwhile, Hubei peeks through the window and catches a glimpse of the majestic white horse galloping by, giving him a moment of happiness, and so he innocently tells his friend Cheiwi to do the same. Unfortunately, as soon as Cheiwi peeks through the window, he is shot in the head and killed. On the other side, the Japanese soldiers construct shields and attempt to breach the building's wall. Alerted to this plan, a Chinese soldier reports it to his superior. The soldier then wraps himself in explosives and leaps off the building, killing several of the enemies. Although he passes away himself, he gives his men a solid chance to defend their territory. Inspired by this act of bravery, more Chinese soldiers follow suit, sacrificing their lives to preserve their land. Soon, the nearby civilians also decide to volunteer their help. Disguised under a Nazi flag, they attempt to deliver a telephone wire to the hideout. However, their progress is hindered by a Japanese sniper positioned at a distance who cruelly fires at them. Despite the danger, a group of determined civilians forms a line, willing to risk their lives to transport the cable roll across. Among them is a staff member of a casino who manages to cross the bridge despite facing a barrage of gunshots. Upon reaching the end of the bridge, he hurls the cable towards the Chinese soldiers, but gets killed in the process. With this sacrifice, the Chinese soldiers inside the hideout are able to establish communication with the city. Afterwards, a group of journalists, including Fang, successfully enters the hideout to gather information regarding the situation. Among them, a journalist named Zhang Jing documents the soldiers' heroic defense of the hideout for a remarkable 3 days. She interviews Colonel Xie, inquiring about the remaining number of soldiers inside the hideout. To motivate the Chinese people and let the world know that they are strong, the colonel deliberately inflates the figure, stating 800 instead of the actual count of 420. Meanwhile, Old Abacus seizes an opportunity to steal Fang's coat, intending to escape from the hideout. However, he is apprehended by Duanwu. When held at gunpoint, Old Abacus pleads for his release, confessing his fear of death and his longing to see his wife. Moved by his desperate pleas, Duanwu is overcome with compassion and ultimately allows Old Abacus to go free. Outside, the civilians start a donation program to provide support for the soldiers inside the hideout. Collected supplies are slung towards the soldiers through the building's windows. The owner of the casino donates a flag, and a young girl named Huaman bravely swims across the river to personally deliver it. Witnessing her courageous act, Duanwu assists her in entering through the window. However, a bullet grazes Duanwu's neck, inflicting a minor injury. During the same night, Colonel Xie announces that the Generalissimo has ordered them to defend the hideout for an additional 2 days, aiming to garner global attention. This means that they shouldn't raise the donated flag, as doing so would provoke the enemy and invite a more ferocious attack. However, this doesn't sit well with the soldiers, as they claim that they are fighting for their motherland, not to impress others. So, they decide to raise the flag and show the enemies that they're still fighting. The following morning, all the Chinese soldiers gather on a rooftop, and the flag is slowly hoisted as Colonel Xie delivers an inspiring speech. The The soldiers are met with cheers from the civilians. However, soon after, the Japanese dispatch a fighter jet that begins firing at the Chinese soldiers, resulting in a devastating loss of life. Despite the onslaught, the soldiers valiantly fight to keep the flag from falling. At one crucial moment, Duanwu takes aim at the enemy pilot but narrowly misses. After 10 minutes of continuous onslaught, the Japanese forces finally retreat. In the aftermath, we learn that Duanwu has been shot in his abdomen. In his final moments, he requests Colonel Xie to take a photograph of him for his brother, Hubei. The following morning, Colonel Kano arrives on a black horse to hold a discussion, prompting Colonel Xie to mount the white horse and meet him. Recognizing that the Chinese will soon receive orders to retreat, Colonel Kano suggests engaging in an honorable battle between them before he is replaced, emphasizing that it will be their final fight. Colonel Xie agrees and returns to prepare his soldiers for the impending showdown. Later that day, the commissioner arrives at the hideout and issues an order to surrender the last standing stronghold to the British. Colonel Xie adamantly refuses, but the commissioner argues that with no external assistance and a seemingly lost cause, it is inevitable. Convinced by the commissioner's reasoning, Colonel Xie reluctantly agrees to prioritize the lives of the remaining soldiers, and they begin preparations for retreat. In order to provide a diversion and buy time for the others to escape, a group of soldiers, including Hubei, selflessly decide to remain behind and distract the Japanese forces. As night falls, the searchlights are turned off to facilitate the soldiers' retreat. Then the Chinese soldiers are instructed to form groups of 20 and cross the bridge, increasing their chances of survival. Meanwhile, a crowd of civilians gathers on the opposite side, observing the soldiers' perilous crossing. The situation intensifies as the Japanese activate their own searchlights and unleash flames to make it easier to target the soldiers on the bridge. Despite the daunting circumstances, the Chinese soldiers bravely begin their crossing while the Japanese open fire. This causes several Chinese soldiers to get shot one after another. Witnessing the tragic scene unfold, the civilians on the other side decide to assist the Chinese soldiers. They prepare medicines and even engage the enemy from their balconies, firing shots in support. Tragically, the majority of the Chinese soldiers are killed on the bridge. Colonel Xie, also sustaining a gunshot wound, remains on the side of the bridge, overwhelmed with grief as he realizes he cannot save everyone. The movie concludes with civilians extending their hands from behind barricades, helplessly witnessing the merciless shooting of the soldiers.